as we get started here. Got a few people already attending. We are recording for those of you who are not able to join us live. But for those of you who are here, I would love your comments in the Q&A or your ideas in the Q&A as we go along. I'll check that occasionally. So we are in week number 5 or class number 5. We're actually doing this series over the course of the year this year. So one class a month every first Monday of the month. This is 2025. And this is our Preventing Diabetes series. Those of you who have been with us, welcome back. Those of you who are new, we run this as a webinar, so I can't see you or hear you, but I'm happy to take your questions. You can put those in the Q&A. And if there's anything that we don't get to, or if there's any question that I can't answer live and on the spot, then I can get back to you at a future class. We are going through the Preventing Diabetes book, which Stilly Valley should have given you that link to purchase or to get at the library. But don't feel like you need to have the book in order to follow along. All of these slides you will get, and you'll get the recording as well. And so you'll have plenty of information, even if you are not reading the book. But if you are reading the book, it's just a little bit more like, repetition, and it sinks in a little bit more and gives you a little primer on what we're covering. So, alrighty, let's dive in. First of all, let's go through and talk about last month. Here was the homework from last month. We talked a lot about planning ahead for meals. Oh, and I will just introduce myself for those of you who may not have met me before. My name is Megan Ellison. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. So those are my two niches. And thank you to Stilly Valley Health Connections for sponsoring this series. So your homework from last month, think about your meal planning, maybe do some brainstorming, take a little bit more time, get out your cookbooks or your old recipe cards if you have them, and make a plan. Make a plan for a week at a time or even a couple of days at a time. Lately, quite a few of my patients have been going towards just like 2 or 3 days planning at a time, just chunking it up even smaller. And that has been working really well for them. So if a week is too much for you, maybe even take it like 2 days at a time and just make a plan for those 2 days or even 1 day. If you're finding that you're not making a change or you're not like moving forward with a goal, sometimes you just got to break it down until that first step is so small that you can easily take it. So yeah, think maybe smaller if you haven't met that goal for this month. And then taking inventory, making a grocery list. What do you have on hand? What do you need? And then see how it went. So does anybody have any comments or questions on that? Any feedback on what you worked on this past month? I'm going to look at the Q&A. The chat is disabled, so you can't chat, but you can put something in the Q&A if you want to share with the group. That'd be great. I'll check back on that in a minute. Oh, here we go. Here's at least one. Unrelated. So Vicky's asking a question, unrelated to today, but a few sessions ago you talked about getting tested for low vitamin D. Cannot remember why this is important. Had it tested very low and now taking a supplement. Yeah, okay. So vitamin D does so many things in the body. One of the reasons we were probably talking about it in relation to this class series is blood sugar control. Also, if you're trying to start exercising and you're having muscle soreness, muscle fatigue, sometimes low vitamin D can be involved in that. For women, especially postmenopausal women, very important for bone density, really important for everybody's bone density, but postmenopausal women we're really thinking about that, osteopenia, osteoporosis. And here in the Northwest, most of us, like the majority of people, are actually deficient in vitamin D. So we want to be checking it in order to catch that and be supplementing in our diet because it does impact so many different aspects of our health. And thinking about like this class and blood sugar control, that's one of the things that can be impacted. Okay, Nancy says, found the homework challenging but helpful. Making it a habit is going to need reminders on your calendar. Yeah, actually, that's a brilliant idea. Like put it on your Saturday or your Sunday schedule so you get a little pop-up saying, have you done your planning for the week? Have you done your meal planning? Have you done your grocery shopping? Yeah, I like that idea of a reminder because sometimes our schedule on the weekends is so different and it's different every weekend that we can sometimes not have that structure that would be helpful for making that a routine. Or maybe you pick a different day of the week. Like maybe you just go on a random week, like not on the weekends, like on a weekday instead, because sometimes the weekends are a little busy. Like a Wednesday night and just make that your night, and make it a habit that way. And then Lori says, I do so much better when I plan ahead. Yes, it's half the battle is planning ahead. Okay, we're going to talk about eating out of, well, no, what are we talking about today? Shopping, shopping and preparing meals. We're going to talk about eating out at another class. So with the shopping thing, your book talks about some of the shopping bad advice. And she kind of, this is Jill Weisenberger, she's a dietitian. She kind of turns some things on their head to make you think about it. So, for example, you've probably heard the advice like shop only the perimeter of the store. But, the donut station is in the perimeter, right? And some of the really refined breads and things are in the perimeter. And what about the things in the middle that are super healthy, like your canned beans or your frozen fruits or your whole grains? Sometimes, even like the bulk bins, like Fred Meyer here in Linwood has rearranged their layout, and now the bulk bins are like in the middle of the store. So to get to the nuts and the seeds and things like that, you gotta go into the middle of the store. So, the perimeter isn't the only place with good, nutritious foods, but the point of kind of thinking about your shopping strategy is if there's an aisle you don't need to go down, don't go down it, right? So sometimes, like when you make that grocery list, it's nice to even like chunk it up by where you want, like the deli section, for example, or the fruits and vegetables section. You can kind of chunk up your list according to where it is in the store, so where you want to go. And then you can avoid whole sections. Like maybe you don't need to go down the chip aisle if there's, not something there that is going to support your health goals. Maybe you just avoid it and that's easier, right? Because sometimes if we see it, we want it. But if it's not on the list, you don't need to necessarily go down that aisle. But don't miss out on the nutritious things that are in the middle of the store. Number two, avoid processed foods. Well, a lot of our healthy foods have been somewhat processed, like our cut up, broccoli florets, for example, or even like some of my patients these days are using those platters, like the veggie platters, like the trays that you buy for like potlucks and gatherings. They'll just buy one of those for their week and like, pull off of that because it's washed, it's chopped, it's ready to go. That is processed, right? But it is still a whole food. They've basically done the work for you. So, there's different levels of processing with all of this. Another example listed here, there are now some quick cooking whole grains where they've processed them in the sense that they've par cooked or steamed those whole grains, dried them, and made them like 10-minute cooking time. So instead of 50 minutes for barley, it's like 10 minutes for barley. Some of those, I call them like semi-prepped or semi-processed items are really nice as far as still being a whole food, giving you all that nutrition, but it being like halfway done for you. So if some of those ideas are helpful, use the chopped, ready to go butternut squash in the fall So you don't have to do the peeling, especially if you have like dexterity issues or if that's a barrier for you. If there's barriers that are getting in your way of eating healthfully, maybe you remove some of those barriers and just pay a little bit extra to get the semi-prepped thing. Okay. Number 3, choose only foods labeled natural or organic. Well, natural isn't a regulated term, not yet. There is some talk about making it have a definition, but right now we don't have a definition for it on the labels. And organic really doesn't have necessarily to do with the nutrients, like the macronutrients and micronutrients. It has more to do with like the growing situation, how it's processed, what pesticides, herbicides were used or not, etc. So, that doesn't necessarily tell you, if it has, for example, here, the organic sugar cookie. Well, it's still a sugar cookie, right? Um, okay. And then we do know that fruits and veggies are recommended, whether they are organic or not, as far as like their net benefit for us. So if that's a barrier, if you're feeling like, oh, I can't buy the blueberries because they're not organic, we have research showing that it's still better to have the blueberries than to not have the blueberries. So go ahead and just, lower that little bit of barrier that you're maybe creating for yourself there. Number 4, when in doubt, choose the one without. So do be careful with some of these marketing schemes out there. Like, if you're choosing something because it is a fad or because it's saying free, gluten-free, sugar-free, fat-free, what is the replacement there? Oftentimes it's actually not a more nutritious item. So for example, like fat-free ice cream, well, they're adding more sugar to make that taste good still, right? So it might not be a net benefit for what your goals are. And focus on what's there rather than what's missing. Now, if you need to be gluten-free, like you have actual celiac disease, then of course look for that gluten-free label. But most of us do not need to be worrying about that. Number 5, skip anything with more than 5 ingredients. Some of us have heard this. And it's kind of a nice rule of thumb, but what about the things that, have added vitamins and minerals, for example? So, sometimes the list gets kind of long because of those added nutrients. Or if it's just an item that has lots of different things in it, like let's say it's like a cowboy caviar salad with corn and black beans and cilantro and onions and tomatoes and avocado and some oil and some vinegar, so you get my point. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good item just because the list is a little bit long, but actually look and see what is in that ingredient list. If it's real food, you're pretty good to go there. Okay, let's check on the Q&A here. Just take a little breather. Get rid of some of these we already answered. Okie dokie. And then Lori says, I love ordering my groceries online and picking up at Fred Meyer. That way I'm not browsing and tempted to buy things I don't need. Brilliant idea. So a lot of my patients actually have found that this ordering online and either picking it up or having it delivered, whatever you prefer, really does help save them money, even if there is like a delivery charge, for example, because they're not doing that random like extra shopping that happens when we're in the store, and they're sticking with the list. So if that's helpful for you and it saves you time, that might be a nice option. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Lori. Alrighty, 7 shopping tips. So do shop with a list. You'll be more efficient and hopefully avoid, some of those impulse buys. Carry a hand basket if you can, get your little arm workout. And then hopefully you're also shopping, in little chunks. So you're not having to do a whole big shopping spree at once. Of course, that's not going to work at Costco, but, for your smaller stores, maybe you can get in and out with just the hand basket. Read the fine print. So sometimes that marketing on the front is, like the sugar-free thing, for example, is just marketing. So, flip it over, look at the nutrition facts panel. We'll talk about a facts panel here in just a minute, and look at the ingredient list, see what's actually in it. Stop shopping tips. One of her tips was avoid partially hydrogenated oils or trans fats. This one is superfluous because the FDA has now banned this ingredient, so we don't really have to worry about that one anymore. And then the made with claims, such as made with real fruit. You may have seen this on things like little fruit snacks that are like mostly just sugar and pectin, but they have a little bit of like real fruit juice in there. So the question is really like how much? If the first ingredient is sugar, then it's not really fruit, right? But if the first ingredient is figs and then mango, that's real fruit. So look at the ingredient list. Beware of specials. Sometimes the specials lure us into buying more than we need. And then double check your list before checking out. Make sure you're not forgetting anything. So let's look at that label. Our nutrition facts label has changed in the past couple years, and we now have a bigger, bolder total for the calories and for the amount. So that serving size is much more prominent. So you can see on this second new label here, because before the serving size was a little bit small. So this thing has 8 in the container. So if you ate the whole container, you got to multiply all these numbers by 8. Or if you ate half the container, so 4 servings, got to multiply this by 4. So I always start with the serving size and see like, is this thing 1 serving or is it many, many servings? And then depending on your calorie needs, you'll be able to figure out like, well, is this a snack for me or is this more like a meal for me? Saturated fat. So the saturated fat is the type of fat that does tend to raise our cholesterol, especially our bad cholesterol, the most. So most of us who are worried or watching our blood sugar are also thinking about heart health because really long term, like it's the impact on cardiovascular health that the high glucose is having that in the end, most Americans die of heart disease, including people with diabetes. And poor blood sugar just speeds up that process. So we're always thinking about heart health. So, watching your saturated fat can be helpful. So in this item, the total fat 8 grams, only one of it is saturated. And they don't have to tell you the poly and the mono unsaturated, but you can infer that because there's only 1 gram of saturated and 0 trans, and we know now that trans fat is really not in our dietary supply anymore, as an added thing, then the rest are the heart healthy fats. So 7 grams of your poly and mono unsaturated fats. So I would consider this one a win for sure from a heart health sense. I'm not so worried about cholesterol because we know that dietary cholesterol really isn't impacting our endogenous or internal cholesterol. So don't worry so much about that. It's really the saturated fat that raises our internal cholesterol. I would check the sodium. Most of us are getting way more salt than we need. And one little rule of thumb, if you are looking at the calories compared to the sodium, you can kind of compare that, and you don't want the sodium to be too much higher than the calories. And if you think about that, so let's say that somebody's on like a 2,000 calorie diet. Well, most of us should be eating around like 2,000 milligrams of sodium or less. Or if someone's on like a 1,500 calorie diet, well, they need less salt. So you can do that like quick comparison. So if this sodium was like way higher than this 230, it would give me pause to think, well, maybe I can find a lower sodium option, but this one fits. Total carbs. So your total carbohydrate line is bold. Notice that the fiber and the sugars are indented and not bold. So those numbers are part of your total. So that total carbs, 37 grams, the 4 grams of fiber is already in that 37. And this 12 grams of sugar is already in that 37. So a couple things with this. If you were only looking at sugar, you're not seeing the big picture of the total carbs that are going to turn into sugar in the body, right? So sometimes people are only looking, like when they're first thinking about blood sugar, that blood sugar, the sugar is such a strong word and so like kind of emotional that's what people are gravitating to on the label. But remember that carbs are long chains of sugar. So the body breaks it down really quickly. So we want to be watching, not just total sugar, but like how much is turning into sugar in the body. And that would be the total carbs, the 37 grams. So there's some starches in there that they're not telling you about. However, the fiber is free. So we don't have a formal rule on this, like how to handle counting the fiber, but we do know that you're not going to turn it into sugar. So technically that 4 grams out of that 37 is a free type of carbohydrate. We don't turn it into sugar. We don't digest it into calories. So really it's only 33 grams that's going to raise blood sugar and be adding to your overall caloric intake. All that to say, the higher the fiber, the better the deal. So if you are comparing a couple different labels and you're looking at bread, for example, or tortillas or whatever it is, grains, rice, for example, and one has 5 grams and one only has 1 gram, the 5 grams is going to be a better deal. Of course, assuming they're the same serving size and all of that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more to be looking at on your labels. And then if the protein content is pretty low, like this thing is mostly carbs. I don't know what this label is for, but it's mostly carbohydrate. There's not very much protein there, like 3 grams of protein. If it's less than 5 grams, and this is meant to be a snack, or if it's less than 15 grams and this is meant to be a meal for you, you probably want a little bit more protein to pair with this so you feel full, and also so that helps you slow down digestion of the carbs. We talked about this last month. We want to be doing that pairing of protein with carbs or protein/fat with carbs. So I would add a handful of nuts to this, or a piece of string cheese, or maybe some peanut butter. Like maybe these are some like crackers or like a granola bar or something that's not very high in protein. You could add some peanut butter to it. But whatever it is, think about like that pairing. Another trick that I often use is the carb to protein ratios. And you want your protein grams to be about 50% or more compared to your carb grams in order to have that really good balance from like a digestion and blood sugar sense. So let's say that this thing had 17 grams of protein. Well, then all of a sudden it's better balanced protein to carb, because my 37 minus my 4 of fiber, 33 grams, I want at least like 16, 17 grams of protein. If this is going to be like a well-rounded, it'll probably be a meal for me if I add that protein to it, to be both satiating, so keeping you full, and slowing down digestion of those carbs. I know that's a lot to think about, but just start looking at your labels, start making some, noticing some things, and maybe making some different swaps depending on what you're concerned with. If it's cholesterol, maybe you're looking at the fats. If it's blood pressure, maybe you're looking at the sodium. If it's blood sugar, you could be looking at those carbs, the fiber, and that carb to protein ratio. Okay, let's look at the Q&A. Question from Langley. Are there any healthy meals that you recommend from Costco? Yeah, I mean, Costco does a great job with lots of like ready prepared things. Like their chicken noodle soup is made with real ingredients. Their Caesar salad is lovely. Even thinking about putting some things together, like their I don't know if you've seen, but they like will shred up their rotisserie chicken. So it's like even off of the bird, off of the carcass, that shredded chicken can be made into so many different meals. Or maybe you just buy the, rotisserie chicken straight up and have many meals out of that. I would peel the skin because that's where the saturated fat and the sodium is at. But Costco is not injecting or brining their birds. They're using fresh birds. So, they're not going to have the added salt in the meat itself. So that's great. And then, there are some frozen things too. Like sometimes I will get their bean and cheese burritos in the freezer section as like a plan B meal. Like maybe instead of going through the fast food station or eating out, you have a plan B meal in the freezer and you can just add a big salad to it. And that's a quick dinner with real food. So some of those items, but I would look at the ingredient list and just see like, what's in there and does it look like real food? And can you take something else to round it out? Like, like their frozen broccoli, the big bag of the smaller bags of broccoli at Costco is a really nice deal because then you have it in the freezer at all times to pop in the microwave or put on the stove and just steam it really quick while you cut up some rotisserie chicken and have a baked potato in the microwave, So some of those like, halfway done things are really nice options. If anybody wants to put their ideas on Costco in the Q&A, you can share that. Okay, Barbara asked on nutrition facts, we subtract fiber from total carbs to monitor our carbs. So yeah, so you can if you want to. You don't have to. This gets a little bit mathy, right? For some people, there's like, I don't want to worry about it. I just want to look at the total carbs, and that's totally fine. We don't have a formal recommendation from like the American Diabetes Association, for example, on what to do with fiber. But I always like to emphasize it because it gets people to pick usually more whole foods. If you're comparing like white rice and brown rice and you're looking at the label, you're like, oh, the brown rice is like 4 times the amount of fiber. You might make a different choice if you're looking at that fiber. So it's something to consider. And it, from a health sense, like most of us are not getting enough fiber anyway. So we want to be working on that. Yeah, good question. And then Heather's asking about what are sugar alcohol effects. Yeah, there's no sugar alcohols on this label, but if there were in this item, they would now have to list them. And the effects are that they act kind of like fiber in the sense that we don't turn them into sugar right away. So they're not going to raise your blood sugar right away, but they do get fermented by your good bacteria, your gut bugs in your large intestine, your colon. And then they make a little gas when they're doing that fermentation process. So sometimes people have gas, bloating, maybe even some diarrhea if you get too much of the sugar alcohols at one time. So you'll see these sugar alcohols added to things like sugar-free items, like the sugar-free gums and candies and ice cream, for example. Some of my GI patients who already have GI disturbances will have significant distress with the sugar alcohols, but some other people can tolerate it just fine. If it helps you to keep your overall sugar intake lower, it could be an option for you, but it will be self-limiting. Like if you overdo it on it, you will know. So, just be careful with your portions of those things. And then if you feel like you're sensitive, you probably want to just cut it out. Okay, let's move on. We're going to just go through some different sections of the grocery store and talk about things to think about. So in the produce section, remember back to the plate where we talked about like half of that plate would be fruits, veg, especially more of that non-starchy veggies if you're really thinking about blood sugar control. So if you're thinking about that plate being half produce, is what's in your cart kind of looking like that? Like, do you have enough, either fresh, frozen, or canned? Doesn't really matter what the form is, but do you have enough of the produce to make sure that you're getting enough at your meals and, half your meal or half that plate or bowl being from some sort of colorful produce? Do you have a variety of colors? Eating the rainbow is really important for getting the different phytonutrients, which feed our different gut bugs, which then help with things like blood sugar, cholesterol, weight management, all of those, good things. And they have different preferences. They like different foods, just like you and I have different preferences. So you want to be eating a variety of different fibers and phytonutrients. And you can know that by like looking at your cart and saying, do I have a rainbow of color here? Because then you're going to be getting, feeding a variety of your different microbes that are giving you benefits. I would buy in varying stages of ripeness. So for example, like with my avocados, or if I buy the little bag of like the peewee avocados, I will then open it up and stage them in different places. Like a couple go in the garage, a couple go on the counter, a couple go in the fridge. Then they're ripening at different stages. So you're not having like everything ripe at once and then trying to figure out what to do with 6 avocados at the same time. So just from a food, you know, um, waste sense, like be careful with that. Don't forget about your fresh herbs. We know that those are adding a lot of nutrition. So they're very nutrient dense without being calorie dense. And they're also adding a lot of flavor. So you can maybe cut down on the salt. And then I would use the ready to go things like the triple washed greens or the broccoli florets I already mentioned, or like the shredded coleslaw. If that gets you to make a coleslaw salad, whereas if you bought the whole cabbage head and you're not going to take the time to shred it, well, remove that barrier for yourself. And then try not to buy, especially with the fresh stuff. Try not to buy too much. Like get the amount you will need before your next shopping trip. The example here is the bananas. Like just take off the 2 bananas if you only want 2 for the next couple days. Versus like buying the whole bunch and then some go bad. If they do start turning, just throw them in your freezer. Same thing with your other fresh stuff. Like if you bought fresh broccoli and you're not going to get to it and you're going away for the weekend, stick it in your freezer. It'll be fine. You can come back to it and like maybe you steam it. It's not going to be as crunchy, but maybe cook it a different way. Okay. Dairy case. So there's a lot going on in the dairy aisle these days that is not dairy. So a lot of alternatives, a lot of milk alternatives. Um, Cow and soy milk have the most protein. So when you are thinking about getting adequate protein, especially if you're using this at breakfast, because a lot of us tend to have like the typical American thing where it's like cereal and milk for breakfast, carbs and carbs for breakfast. Well, at least with the cow milk, you have some protein there. But some of these milk alternatives, like almond milk, rice milk, they're very low in protein. So you might have to think about like, where is my protein coming from in order to, bump that up at the meal, especially if you're already pairing it with some carbs. And then do think about fortification. So in order to be getting enough of the calcium, for example, you want that milk alternative to be fortified and you want it to not have the added sugars. So some of them, it's a little tricky because they'll say like, for example, vanilla, but maybe it's just the vanilla flavoring without added sugar. So there's that option. Uh, some of the regulars have the added sugar, but you have to look for like the unsweetened version. But if you just turn it over and look at the ingredients, it will also tell you, right? Or you can look at that added sugars line now that we have that in the label and look for the added sugar there. What else? Low fat and non-fat are typically the recommended things, especially with blood sugar control, just because the saturated fat can be a little bit more pro-inflammatory. And so with insulin resistance, we're thinking about lowering inflammation. So, the low and non-fat, and then they also are a little bit less in calories overall. Do look for things that have some live active cultures in them, like your fermented foods like kefir and yogurt. There's so many yogurt-based fun things these days, like the yogurt dressings in the refrigerated section by the salads and the yogurt dips, especially the Greek-style yogurt dips for your veggies. Those are really nice. They basically have more protein and less lactose, so less of the milk sugar. And they've got those added probiotics, which is nice. And then with cheese, I always just say quality over quantity. Like, get what you really like, but then just watch your portion with it. Don't overdo it, because that is one thing a lot of people tend to kind of overdo the cheese. Okay, butter, eggs, and dips. So when we're thinking about heart health, butter is highly saturated. So if you are also having high cholesterol, this should be, something you're thinking about. And some of the spreads nowadays are actually really nice. They're not the trans fats like you think about the old style margarines that had the trans fats in them. When you read the labels now, it's like, just a list of vegetable oils in there with a little bit of like saturated, like a little bit of coconut or a little bit of palm. But overall, they're less saturated fat than butter. So if you like some of those spreads, like the Smart Balance or like Earth Balance, things like that, you can certainly use that like on toast. I will say they don't cook well. Like if you're trying to saute or you're trying to bake, you're much better off with just like a straight up olive oil or grapeseed oil or avocado oil. Just use a straight up oil if you're trying to saute or like fry an egg, for example, or saute veggies. Do be careful about coconut. I spelled coconut wrong. Coconut. There you go. Coconut is highly, highly saturated. It's actually more saturated than butter, but it raises cholesterol about the same as butter, is what we see in the research, meta-analysis research studies, where they've looked at a bunch of different studies and put it all together, comparing our different oils. And the reason for that is coconut, some of it is the medium chain triglyceride that doesn't have as much impact on cholesterol, but because it's so highly saturated, like up to 91% saturated, where butter is only 68% saturated on average, they're raising cholesterol about the same. So I would treat coconut like you treat butter, especially if you are watching like heart health or you have a family history of heart disease. Okay, eggs. We know we're not worried about the cholesterol in the eggs anymore. And they're low in saturated fat. So they're a great protein source. They're actually one of our only sources for vitamin D. And they've got the choline in there, which is good for brain health. So eggs can be a really nice option. Of course, they're expensive right now, but that should remedy as we get through this egg crisis. Other nice protein-based dips like hummus, for example, or like this Greek-style yogurt that goes well with veggies, or even like a guacamole. That's another thing at Costco. They have the little to-go packs. They're like portion-controlled snack size guacamole packets. Those are fantastic for pairing with your veggies, for example, or some whole grain crackers. So yeah, those can be some nice options to add protein / fat to your day. Deli case. So with the deli case, look for, the ingredient list to be pretty simple. Nowadays, with our refrigeration and our really good transportation setup, like we're not as worried about meat spoiling. I mean, 100 years ago, it was a totally different scenario where we really needed those added preservatives in there. Nowadays, we don't need it as much because everything is so cold, and you can get the lower sodium options and they still last a long time in your fridge. A lot of times you have to go to the deli counter though and ask for the lower sodium options because it might not be obvious in like the section where it's prepackaged. And sometimes they have like specialty items behind the counter. So I would just ask that deli person about their lower sodium deli meats. And do be careful with the highly processed meats. So with the highly processed meats, those are the ones that are associated with that increase in colorectal cancer specifically. So things like, salami and hot dog and sausage and bologna. Some lighter cheese options if you're wanting that. Light Havarti, Charlesburg Light, and Alpine Swiss are nice. And then you can just get your regular cheese too, and maybe you just do like extra thin slices if you're really watching portions or trying to, cut back a little bit on calories if weight management is a concern for you with managing your blood sugar. We already talked about the rotisserie chicken. I would just ask if they are using fresh birds and make sure they're not, you know, brining or injecting them with a sodium solution. And then the deli counter can also be a nice place for some whole food salads, like the bean salad, for example, or grain-based salads, vegetable salads. Look for the ones with like vinaigrettes on them, for example. So, there can be some really nice options there that are quick, ready to go. Okay. Proteins. So we are thinking ideally leaner proteins, partly because animal protein is where we find some of that saturated fat that again can increase that insulin resistance and contribute to higher cholesterol. So we're looking for things like loin and round are good cuts as far as like obviously right off the bat, if that word is in that title, like sirloin, for example, it's going to be a leaner cut. So those are nice things to look for. And then just watch the portion. There's so much emphasis on protein, like overemphasis for some people on protein these days, that I find some people are coming in just way overdoing it on the protein. Now, some of my patients really need more protein and they're missing it at key times of the day, like breakfast and snacks, especially, and then way overdoing it at dinner. So, just think about like how is your protein spaced over the day? About the size of your palm is a good protein at one sitting. And then ideally you'd be having protein multiple times. So you're not trying to like save up for like dinner, for example, and have protein. It's like protein here, protein there, protein at your snack, protein at lunch. So space it. We already talked about skinless poultry. What else? When you're buying like ground, you can look for that 90 to 95% lean, or even 97% they have these days. And then more efficient seafood. So most people are not getting the recommended 2 to 3 servings a week. That's recommended for heart health. And so a lot of us are low on omega-3s for that reason. And we're also not doing like enough of our walnuts and chia and flax, some of those plant-based options for omega-3s. So do think about that. There's a lot of good frozen options these days. Like somebody mentioned Costco earlier today. Like Costco has really good individually packed salmon fillets and mahi-mahi and the Trident Foods salmon patties that are already pre-seasoned. They're like burgers. Those are really nice to have around because they cook up in less than 5 minutes, or you can put them on the grill, put them in the skillet, and that's a quick, nice, and less expensive seafood option. And then don't forget about plant-based proteins. So tofu, tempeh, beans. Beans are fantastic, really high in fiber, but also really good in that protein. When you're looking for the tofu, sometimes it's actually in the refrigerated section by the salads or by like the yogurts, interestingly. And it can be a really good source of calcium. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense from a nutrient sense. Okay, freezer aisle. So There are some really good frozen meals out there. Don't just write them off just because, it's a frozen dinner. When you're looking for frozen meals, here are some parameters. So you're looking at, the calories that fit into your goals, less saturated fat, less salt for sure, hopefully a little fiber there and enough protein. But there are some really nice ones out there like Kashi brand, Healthy Choice steamer bowls are doing a good job. Even like Lean Cuisine is doing a good job of like a balance. So it's, macronutrient paired and not too high in salt and not too big of a portion. Amy's organic line, although she can be a little salty, so watch that. And with Amy's, I always look for the she has a reduced sodium line that'll say right on the outside of the box. You can, just kind of scan the aisles for that. And then get a couple if you are finding that you're either too tired at dinner or you're forgetting your lunch when you're going out to eat, or, you need that like backup plan. So like plan C. It's nice to have a couple in the freezer. It's a nice option. Not your number one option, right? But it's an option that's better than like going through the fast food drive-through. Okay. Look for your fruits and vegetables. If they're frozen, look for them to be plain. So it just says broccoli or it just says mango, right? Not a bunch of added stuff. Shrimp and individually wrapped fish fillets are great. Even whole grains we now have frozen, like the frozen brown rice, for example, that perfectly steams in 2 minutes. Can be a nice quick option. And then beans like the edamame here, which is in the pod, the whole soybean. You can have that as a snack. Or the muki mame, which is removed from the pod. Those are really great in like stir fry. Or for some of my patients who are like college students and eating ramen, we'll just have them add some of that muki mame to that. So they're getting protein, they're getting some fiber, they're getting some color in there. So you can kind of just jazz up other meals that you're doing already. And then if you're in the freezer aisle looking for treats, my recommendation would be just look for smaller serving sizes, like an individual serving size is a nice way to go for that. Okay, we're only halfway through this list, so we might not make it through all of these slides in the hour. And if not, I might move some of them to next time and we'll cover them at the next class, but I will still send you all these slides. With your breads and crackers, so we already talked about whole grains. One way you can quickly look for that is this whole grain label on the outside of the package. If it says 100% whole grain, like it was made with whole grains. So for example, like Triscuits, 100% whole wheat on there. That was that's the main thing. And when you look at the ingredient list, it should say, whole wheat as that first ingredient. You can think about just adjusting your portion size a little bit. Like if you're doing rolls or like the bagels that are like 4-ounce bagels, which are really the equivalent of 4 slices of bread from a carb sense, you could do the mini bagels, right? Or you could do half a bagel if you're really watching your carbs, for example, or the sandwich thins. Our bread, the 1950s bread was a square, and our bread nowadays is a giant rectangle. So you might want to go back to the square or use like, 1 slice instead of the 2, because everything's kind of gotten bigger over time. Check the serving size for things like crackers in your snacks. Look for fiber. Here's a good rule of thumb for that, at least 1 gram of fiber per 50 calories. And then you're watching the added sodium and sugar, especially on things that are in boxes, like processed things. And then here's some nice snack options like popcorn, dehydrated vegetable chips, whole grain crackers, fruit leather that's actually made with fruit, nuts and seeds, roasted chickpeas or roasted edamame. If you need like bars as a kind of a quick option, look and see that like you can see the whole thing. Like you can see whole nuts and seeds and whole oats and dried fruit. in that bar. So it's made from real food. Okay, let's see here. Canned and packaged foods. So there are some really nice options like our canned chicken breast, canned tuna, just in either oil or in water. Canned beans are so lovely. So don't just write off canned products. You do want to look for lower salt options, especially if blood pressure is a concern. But also, if you just have the cans at home and it's already got the salt in it, you can rinse, like the beans, for example, or if you've got corn or green beans, you can rinse those and rinse some of that salt off. Um, the research shows you can rinse about up to 40% of that sodium off of there. So it's not quite half, but almost. And then with your condiments, look for some lower sodium condiments, like your tomato sauces and tomato paste, for example. But yeah, we've got lots of different options. When you're looking for fruit, look for the no sugar added options or in its own juice. And then with the soups and the broths, this is one area where I would really think about the salt, either going no salt added or at least reduced, but ideally like look for that no salt added because the reduced is just reduced from the original and sometimes it's still really high in sodium. So you may want to start with like the no salt added version and then just salt to taste. What else? Maybe get creative with some of your pastas. There's some really great whole grain pastas these days that have more protein and fiber, or like a Banza pasta that has the high protein, high fiber, lower carb option. This is made from chickpeas, so it's made out of a bean. This is a nice pasta. I love this pasta actually. I think it's more satisfying, it's more filling because of that fiber and protein. So you can look for something like this. Okay, condiments continued. The freezer section, like at Trader Joe's, for example, they've got the little pop out 1 teaspoon garlic and ginger. Those are nice to have as backups in case you run out of your fresh or you just don't want to do the chopping. Or the in the tubes. So nowadays they have the paste in the tubes in like the salad section of the grocery store where you can just get a tube of garlic or a tube of ginger paste or even like cilantro and different herbs. And it's just in the fridge. It lasts months in the fridge. It's always ready to go. And then you've got that little flavor to add without a lot of extra work in your cooking. Vinegars are great because they add a lot of punch. However, be careful about seasoned vinegars. So vinegar itself should be 0 sodium, but there are some seasoned ones that are on the shelf right next to the other vinegar. They look the same except they're seasoned, and they're really high in salt. So just be careful of those. Oils for different purposes. So extra virgin olive oil for like your dressings or like a light saute, or if you want a lot of flavor. Canola, grapeseed, and avocado are great for higher heat and when you want a clean taste because they're very neutral tasting, or like when you're baking, for example. A walnut and flax is nice if you're doing something like a dressing or you're trying to really bring out that flavor of that nut or that seed, like in a muffin, for example. Those can be nice. And then definitely things like your soy sauce and even things like ketchup. You can find lower sodium ketchup these days or lower sugar ketchup. And then load up on the herbs and spices. The more the merrier of those. Okay. We've already talked about cooking at home last week with like kind of starting to plan. But the biggest thing is like you get to control what goes in there. You get to make a more realistic portion size versus like when we go out to eat and they give us a platter instead of a plate. You are also saving money. I'm sure there's lots of other reasons. If you have a particular reason you like to cook at home, you could put that in the Q&A. But you might need some ideas. So here are some of my favorite ideas or things that I've used in the past. If you're really into cooking and like the science of cooking, this food lab, it's like a textbook, is by Kenji Lopez Alt, is fantastic, I will say. If you're just starting out, this How to Cook Everything by Mark Bittman is great. If you're looking for more specific, like diabetes friendly recipes, I really like this Diabetes Meals by The Plate. It's very visual. And of course, there's like the magazines like Diabetes Self Management, Diabetes Living. They always have recipes if you want to subscribe to something where it's like more seasonal and you get new ideas each month. But there's lots of things out there. So, and you probably already have things at home too that you can go back through and kind of curate to try some new things now that you have more of this information of what we're looking for: more vegetables, more fiber, less salt, lean proteins, all of those things. Okay. We are not going to go into the details here with the prepping at home. I think I'll go through this next time because there's some really detailed options on like substitutions when you are doing this at home. So we'll talk through this next month, but I am going to send you this regardless. And we'll also talk about kitchen equipment next month as well, and meal prepping. So here's your homework. You're going to keep working on your grocery list and meal planning procedure. Your book has some good ideas on that. Read some labels in your cupboard. Now that we went over that nutrition label today, go ahead and look at some labels in your cupboard or your fridge or your freezer. You know, look at that like calorie to sodium goal or amount. Look at the serving size. Look at the fiber. Look at the total carbs. Check out the protein if it's like a ready to go snack. See if there's enough protein there. And then make a list. Maybe you need to do some sleuthing for some alternatives next time. You might need a little bit more time at the grocery store to, actually like spend some time looking at labels and doing some comparisons. The other thing, we'll do this next month because this is assessing your skills. Like, what do you need to learn? Maybe you already know, but we'll talk about that more next month. And assessing your kitchen equipment, we'll talk about more next month. But maybe there's something you already know that you need that will really support you making quicker or healthier choices. Like maybe you've been thinking about getting a blender for a while so you can make some smoothies. It was probably time to just like get it, right? Bite the bullet and go get the bullet or the Ninja or whatever it is. Okay. And then take some time to actually do some cooking, maybe on the weekends, maybe a little batch cooking, prepping for the week. Hopefully some of these ideas are helpful for you or give you some inspiration to, think about what you want to work on for this next month. If there's any more questions at this moment, put them in the Q&A. But otherwise, we're going to wrap for today and we'll come back to some of these items next month. And then also talk more about like eating out and some other strategies. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your input and have a fantastic May. I'll see you in June. Bye-bye.